The first encounter the sun on Racker 9 was a dark orange ball that hung low in the sky like a dying ember. The sand was black and sharp like shattered glass, and nothing lived here except those sent to kill or be killed. A squad of Krylok soldiers moved in formation across the canyon floor. They wore armored suits that hissed with every breath. Their weapons were charged, and their minds were cold. These were elite hunters trained to erase entire species. They had done it before, and they believed today would be the same. They had received a strange signal from the edge of the canyon. A life form, one that matched human DNA. That was impossible. The humans had been destroyed 50 years ago during the Burning Wars. Every record said they were wiped out completely. But the signal was clear and steady. One single human was standing alone near the ridge. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He was waiting. General Throzek, the commander of the squad, raised his hand and the others stopped. Through his visor, he zoomed in on the figure ahead. The human was tall, wrapped in old battle armor, the kind the humans used to wear during their last war. Parts of it were melted. One shoulder plate was missing. His helmet was gone. His face was bare and covered in dust and blood. And yet he stood straight like he wasn't afraid of anything. His eyes were locked on the Kryloks, and there was something wrong in that gaze. It was not fear. It was something else. Something wild. Throzek laughed through his gums and said this would be easy. One human left behind. Probably mad. Probably dying. The others laughed with him. They raised their weapons. One of them, a young soldier named Varen, asked if he could take the shot. Throzek allowed it. Varen aimed his plasma rifle at the human's chest and fired. The bolt shot out with a loud scream and struck the human straight in the torso. The force of the blast was enough to knock down a small tree. Smoke rose from the impact. The human stumbled back slightly but did not fall. For a second no one moved. Then the human raised his head and looked at them again. He smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was slow and stretched like something deep inside him had woken up. His eyes burned with a light the Kryloks had never seen before. He took a step forward. Then another. The squad opened fire together. Plasma bolts filled the air. Red and blue streaks slammed into the human again and again. But he didn't fall. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He walked through the storm like he didn't care. Varen shouted that his rifle was overheating. Another soldier screamed that nothing was working. Throzek ordered them to switch to acid rounds. Too late. The human was already inside their formation. He moved fast. Too fast. One moment he was walking, and the next he was inside the circle tearing through armor like paper. He didn't use a weapon. His fists were enough. One punch shattered a soldier's helmet. Another broke a rifle in half. Blood sprayed across the sand. The screams came next. Throzek tried to activate his emergency beacon, but the human grabbed his arm and crushed the device in his hand. Then he leaned close and whispered something in broken Krylok language. It was hard to understand, but it sounded like my turn. When the backup squad arrived 10 minutes later, they found only silence. The canyon floor was covered in black blood and burning equipment. The bodies of the elite squad were scattered everywhere. The only thing missing was the human. He was gone. No tracks. No signal, no trace. But carved into the side of a large rock near the center of the battlefield was a single word. Burned deep into the stone using the heat of plasma. The word was Dane. Back at Krylok High Command, the generals looked at the footage with disbelief. One human had taken out a whole elite unit. It made no sense. It broke every rule of war they had learned. They didn't know who Dane was. They didn't know where he came from. But one thing was now certain. The humans were not gone. And whatever they had become, it was far more dangerous than anything the galaxy had seen before. They thought he was alone. Silence inside Krylok High Command was not from respect but from fear. Every general in the war chamber watched the footage of Dane again and again, hoping to find a flaw, a trick, anything that could explain what happened in the canyon. But there was nothing. One human had wiped out 12 of their best soldiers without any known weapon or technology. He had walked into plasma fire like it was rain. He had smiled after getting shot. And he had vanished without a trace. General Varkle stood at the center of the command table, his hands trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it. He ordered an immediate planet-wide scan. Satellites, drones, psychic readers, everything they had must be turned toward finding this one human. But even as he gave the order, he knew something was wrong. Something deeper than they could measure. Across the system, other reports started to pour in. Outposts going silent, communication towers destroyed. Soldiers reporting a figure in the shadows before the lights cut off. Every description matched the same man. Tall, scarred face, damaged armor, empty hands, and a grin that made soldiers panic before they died. But it couldn't be one man, not at the speed these attacks were happening. Not across this many planets. Krylok Command started to ask the one question they were never trained to ask: what if he wasn't alone far beneath the crust of a forgotten mining moon? An old Earth escape pod lay buried under layers of metal and ash. Inside, the cryo chambers began to flicker. Red lights turned green. Frost melted from ancient glass. Figures began to move inside. They coughed as air filled their lungs again for the first time in decades. The first to wake was a woman, her eyes sharp like fire cutting through darkness. Her name was Vera, and she looked around the chamber slowly. She saw the other pods. Some were empty, some were broken, but a few were still glowing. She checked the panel beside her and found a name blinking in green. Dane. She whispered his name with a strange mix of fear and pride. Then she touched a button on the panel and sent a signal. A short encrypted burst carrying a single phrase across the stars. He's active elsewhere. Hidden inside the ruins of an asteroid base, another figure received the signal. A man with robotic limbs and half a face made of old Earth steel. His name was Joran, and he stood slowly from his chair as the signal played again. He's active. He turned toward the stars and opened a secure human-only frequency, then said one line in the old code: Echo Team, rise across moons, planets, debris fields. The signal reached those who had once been forgotten. Men and women trained not just to fight, but to survive. Not just to win, but to adapt to horrors the rest of the galaxy would never understand. They had not died when Earth burned. They had been sleeping, waiting, watching and learning. Back at Krylok Command, General Varkle slammed his fist onto the table. He shouted that the humans were a myth, an extinct race wiped out long ago. The room was filled with noise until one technician raised his hand and spoke quietly. Sir, we just intercepted a signal from a human channel. It was sent in multiple directions. Bounced off our own relays to hide its source. The room fell silent again. Varkle demanded to hear the message. The technician played it. The words were clear, spoken in perfect Krylok language. You thought we were gone. You thought wrong. There was no signature. No coordinates. Just the voice and the weight it carried. General Varkle stepped back from the table, his skin pale. For the first time in his career, he didn't know what to say. He knew the humans were supposed to be primitive, savage, emotional, and reckless. But this was not savagery. This was strategy. Long-term, deep-level war planning beyond anything the Krylok had expected. He turned to his advisors and ordered a total blackout. All remaining troops were to retreat to fortified worlds. Civilian evacuation would begin immediately, but it was too late. On 5 different planets at the same moment, human figures stepped out of the dark. They were not armies. They were not fleets. They were small, silent groups moving like ghosts. They didn't use bombs. They didn't need to. They disabled power, crashed the I-cores, cut off food supplies, made entire cities vanish without firing a single shot. The galaxy watched as the Kryloks began to fall from within. And somewhere in the dark, on a quiet, empty moon, Dane stood on a hill watching the night sky burn orange as warships exploded above. He tilted his head and smiled just like he did in the canyon. because they had only shot one of him, but there were many more, and now they were all awake. What they did to Earth in the deepest chamber of the Krylock archive. A door opened that had not been touched in over 70 years. Behind it were files so old and dangerous that even the thought of accessing them triggered alarms across the high command. But this time the order came from the top, so the vault obeyed, and the truth was released. 3 old generals entered the chamber. Slowly the lights flickered as if afraid to show what was written inside. Dusty data panels still hummed quietly, and in the center of the room, a circular table displayed a spinning hologram of a blue planet, scarred by fire, torn by storms, but still whole. Earth General Varkle stared at the hologram for several seconds before he spoke. His voice was low and flat. The record said, Earth was destroyed during the final phase of the Burning Wars, vaporized by orbital weapons, buried under its own dead. Skies unlivable, uninhabitable, silent forever. But the new reports told a different story. The humans were not just alive, they were evolving. They had become something else, something the Krylocks were not prepared for. One of the older generals stepped forward and tapped the panel. He had been there during the war. He had seen Earth's fall with his own eyes, and yet even back then he remembered a warning. The humans had shouted into the stars before the final attack. Not a cry for help, not a surrender, but a promise: you will never understand what you started. Screen changed, showing old footage long banned even among Krylock leadership. It showed humans in the middle of their collapsed cities falling. Diseases spreading, oceans rising, chaos everywhere. And yet in the heart of that chaos there were others, not soldiers, not politicians, but survivors, people who trained under pressure, who built weapons from rubble, who modified their bodies using whatever was left, people who didn't run when the skies burned, but walked into the fire and adapted. The program was unofficial, a rogue experiment funded by a splinter faction of human science lords. They called it Project Voidborn, and it was never meant to save Earth, only to change it into a crucible where only the strongest, the smartest, and the most dangerous would survive. These were not the humans the galaxy remembered. These were not diplomats or colonists or explorers. These were monsters, made from desperation, raised in death, and born again in silence. The general stared at the face of one of the Project Voidborn soldiers. His name was Dane, the same man who had laughed at plasma fire, the same man who walked through a dozen elite warriors like they were leaves in the wind, the same man who had now vanished once more, leaving only terror behind. Meanwhile, across the stars, whispers began to spread, not from humans, but from the older races, the ones who had stayed neutral during the human war. They spoke of things they had seen during the fall of Earthships flying without engines, cities floating in radiation zones, creatures with human eyes and metal bones, watching silently from craters that had never been mapped. A merchant vessel claimed it had seen a black flag near the edge of the void, a single mark painted in blood, the symbol of Earth, not as a planet, but as a weapon. And in the deepest parts of Krylock territory, something strange began to happen. Their own machines started to malfunction one by one. Their AI cores began to speak in broken English. Their targeting systems refused to lock onto human signals. Their star maps started showing new zones marked unknown. Someone or something was rewriting their systems. From the inside, back on the ruined mining moon, Dane walked through a forgotten lab, his footsteps quiet, his face calm. The lights followed him as if recognizing his presence. On the walls were old Earth flags, torn and burned, but still standing beside them were pictures of others, the original Voidborn soldiers, Vera, Joran, and more, some alive, some lost, some still sleeping. Stopped in front of a sealed chamber. The metal was thick, scarred from failed plasma cuts, but the lock opened at his touch. Inside was a weapon no one in the galaxy had ever seen before, made of Earth steel, powered by void energy, written in a language not even Krylock spies had cracked. Dane picked it up slowly and smiled, not because he needed it, but because he remembered why it was made. It wasn't just to kill, it was to remind the galaxy what happens when you try to erase a world and fail to. Remind them that Earth never begged for survival, it prepared for revenge, and now that preparation was waking up. System by system, city by city. The Voidborn were moving again, and nothing would stop them this time. Traps weren't meant for him. Krelok. Prime was no longer silent. The cities buzzed with military orders. The sky was filled with warships. The command towers lit with panic. Red alerts danced across every screen. And still there was no sign of comfort, no moment of control. The fear that had started in whispers now walked in daylight. Every officer, every soldier knew the name they refused to say out loud. Dane. He had become a ghost in their systems, appearing on one planet, then vanishing before their eyes, disabling satellites before they could track him, shutting down power grids without touching them, entire bases losing oxygen supply while still fully intact. The Kryloks had seen war, but they had never seen one man become a storm. So they set traps, not simple ones, but complex, multi-layered death zones designed to fool, confuse, and kill even the smartest enemy they built them in. Toxic gas fields surrounded by silent mines, protected by electromagnetic pulse shields. They placed old human relics inside fake distress beacons designed to draw Dane in. Thinking they understood his curiosity, his hunger for knowledge, he walked into the first trap like it was a game. He moved through the gas without a suit, because his lungs were not the same as before. He stepped over the mines like he could see them. Buried beneath the ash, he stood in front of the fake beacon for 5 seconds, then looked up straight into the hidden drone cameras and smiled. Smile did more damage than any weapon because it told them the truth he knew he always knew. In another sector, a team of bioengineers released a swarm of psychic leeches designed to invade and distort the brain. They were made for humans, specifically modified to target Earthborn neural patterns. But when the swarm reached him, it didn't bite. It paused, hovered, and then turned back around, returning to the lab where it destroyed its creators. The Kryloks reviewed the data again and again. It made no sense unless you accepted the impossible, unless you believed that Dane had changed, not just physically but mentally, that his mind had adapted beyond their science, beyond their understanding. One squad thought they had caught him in a collapsing canyon, the entrance sealed behind him, the exits covered with snipers, the cliffs rigged with explosives, the perfect trap. But when they descended into the gorge, they found only silence at first. Then came the sound of whistling human music echoing off the stone walls. Then came the realization the traps had already been flipped, the explosives reprogrammed, the snipers' weapons jammed, and in the middle of the canyon a message carved into the rock: nice try. It wasn't just his strength. It wasn't just his speed. It was his ability to twist their own tools against them. Dane didn't destroy systems, he absorbed them, used them, made them part of himself. He didn't fight war like a soldier, he played it like a game of chess, 3 moves ahead, and never needing to check twice. And when the Kryloks tried to broadcast warnings across their empire, they found their voice had been stolen, their messages replaced with Earth's old anthem, a song not heard in over 70 years, playing across their networks like a ghost, reminding them with every note that their time was running out. Meanwhile, on a dead space station, drifting near the gravity well of a dying star, the rest of the Voidborn began to gather, not with noise, not with banners, but in silence. They stood in the shadows of forgotten machines. They updated maps, exchanged knowledge, spoken whispers, and planned the next phase of their return. Vera watched the maps light up, each point marked with lock failures, bases that had fallen without battle, fleets that had turned back without orders. Fear had become their enemy, not humans, and that was how they would lose. Joran sat sharpening a blade made from asteroid iron, his mechanical arm humming with soft energy. He didn't speak much anymore. He didn't need to, not when the war was speaking for them. And at the edge of it all, Dane stood watching the stars. One by one they moved across his helmet screen, each a memory, each a place that once fired on Earth, each a place that now trembled as he approached. He wasn't moving fast because he didn't need to. Fear would do most of the work for him. Traps would fail because they were made for men, not monsters, and Earth didn't send men anymore. It sent something else, something that remembered every cry, every lie, every blast that had once tried to silence its name. Now the galaxy was learning, you can't trap what doesn't fear death. You can only wait and hope you're not next. The war becomes a game. The Krylocks no longer walked with confidence. They moved with fear, with hesitation. Every hallway, every shadow now held a question. Was he here? Was he near? Was he watching? The soldiers stopped joking. The officers stopped boasting. The high command locked themselves behind layers of steel and silence, pretending control still belonged to them, pretending they still had answers, but they didn't. Every fleet that launched returned in silence or not at all. Ships sent to ambush Dane simply vanished or came back empty, with weapons melted, controls twisted, and crew reduced to ash. The Krylocks called it sabotage, but deep down they knew sabotage didn't smile into cameras. Sabotage didn't carve messages into the hulls of warships. You started a war with ghosts, losing it to monsters. The humans no longer needed numbers. They didn't fight in waves. They didn't rush the front lines. They struck where it hurt most: communication, data control, fear. They hijacked relays and filled them with laughter, not screams, not threats. Just quiet, cold laughter, the sound of someone who knows the rules better than the one who made them. Had begun to play on the world of Syrinx 3. A group of Krylok elites were stationed in a high-tech fortress. The walls could survive meteor storms. The AI was smart enough to predict assassinations before they happened. The security was flawless until the doors opened on their own, and the lights began to flicker one by one. The soldiers rushed to armory, found nothing missing, but every weapon had a small red mark painted across the grip, the same mark a human soldier once wore during the final Earth War's Voidburn. That night none of the guards slept. The eye spoke once more in a slow human voice, saying one phrase again and again: "This is fun, isn't it?" Across space the same pattern repeated. Factories shut down before orders were given. Mines collapsed after the final load was pulled. Entire moons blinked out from the grid, not with explosions, but with silence, the kind of silence that said someone had already been there, someone who didn't need to be seen to be fear. Joran called it psychological warfare. Vera called it justice. Dane called it a warm-up. Krylocks had always believed in brute force, massive fleets, and brutal invasions. They had never learned to fight in shadows, never learned to win without numbers. And now they were bleeding from every corner of their empire, and they didn't even know where to strike. They sent messages to the other races, allies, old empires even. Former enemies begging for support. Some refused, some laughed. But one message came back from a species so old, most believed them myth. It was a single line carved in stone, delivered to the Krylok capital by an unmarked drone. You woke the fire and poured oil on it. The generals argued for hours. Some demanded a full retreat from all human zones. Others demanded total planetary cleansing, scorched earth tactics, forbidden by interstellar law. But nothing changed, because every day another base went dark, another squad vanished, another scream was heard through the static. And in the middle of it all, Dane moved with calm precision, not like a soldier, not like a killer, but like someone who had been here before, someone who had studied war so deeply it had become second nature. He walked through fire and it bowed to him. He entered enemy labs and they opened for him. He didn't need to fight, because the fear of his fight was already doing the work. The war had become his playground. And the Krylocks were toys, breaking one by one. In a secret control room, hidden beneath a black hole observatory, General Varkle watched the latest report. A soldier had been found wandering alone, blind and shaking. He had survived one of Dane's visits. He said nothing but one word again and again. Laughed. That was the part the Krylocks couldn't understand. He laughed. He always laughed, not out of madness, not out of victory, but out of something deeper. A message: this isn't war, this is payback. Somewhere deep inside a derelict space station where gravity had collapsed and light refused to stay, Dane stood over an old console. He reached out his hand and touched the interface. Without words, the system responded. Earth code filled the screen. Systems aligned and orders were set across the stars. Voidborn began to move faster, more organized, more precise, because now the game was almost over. The final stage was near, and they knew it. They could feel it in the trembling voices of Krylok leaders, in the retreating fleets, in the panicked breaths of soldiers who no longer believed they were fighting men, but something worse, something ancient and angry, and above all they knew this truth: you don't win games when the one who made the rules is playing against you. You only lose slower. The final hunt. The Krylock Empire had stopped calling it a war. They no longer sent out victory broadcasts. They no longer updated casualty lists because there was no point in counting ghosts. Their maps showed blank spaces where colonies once stood. Their charts were filled with red marks labeled compromised, and their generals spoke in whispers behind locked doors, guarded by drones that could no longer be trusted. It was not the fear of losing that broke them. It was the knowledge that no matter what they did, they were being watched. No matter where they hid, he would come for them. So they gathered what remained of their command and retreated into their last fortress, the citadel of the void, a hollowed moon trapped in the orbit of a collapsing star, surrounded by storms of magnetic death with gateways that twisted space and destroyed time. This place had been their final plan. A place no enemy could reach, no signal could escape. A prison for the last war, not a fortress for survival, but a shelter for failure. They thought they were safe here. They didn't understand Dane had already arrived. He didn't come with a fleet. He didn't fire a shot. The warning came as a whisper through the citadel's cum lines, an old Earth code carried on encrypted. Wind, 3 words that meant nothing to machines, but made the blood of surviving commanders run cold. Knock, knock, knock. The first death was quiet. The chief engineer found dissolved in his own coolant chamber, every security drone still active, every door still locked, no alarms triggered. Just one word burned into the wall behind his body: hello. The next night the power grid blinked for 2 seconds, just 2, but when it returned, the entire East Wing was gone. Not damaged, not destroyed, simply gone, like someone had erased it from existence. No explosions, no radiation, no sign of struggle, just cold, empty vacuum, and one survivor shaking inside a sealed closet, whispering. He looked me in the eyes and I forgot how to scream. Inside the citadel, panic spread faster than orders could follow. Soldiers broke rank, officers questioned their commands, and the High Council met for what would be their final session. The question was no longer how to win, it was how to die with dignity. And still, even then, some fools believed they could fight. They prepared a final protocol, a weapon buried at the core of the citadel, built in secret years ago, an energy core that could erase anything within 50 light years, even time itself. A forbidden device known as the Unmaker. It had never been tested because no one was insane enough to activate it until now. Last General stood in front of the core, his hand on the activation panel, eyes wide with desperation. This was it, the last card. If they couldn't stop him, they would erase the battlefield. They would drag him into the void with them and hope the galaxy never heard of humans again. Then the lights died completely, not flickered, died. Total silence fell across the citadel, like a final breath holding itself in fear. And in that silence came the footsteps, slow, even measured. No rush, no panic, just presence, heavy and unbending. He walked through the walls of their strongest fortress, and they could not stop him. He entered without breaking a seal, and their machines bowed in quiet recognition. He did not speak because the silence screamed louder than words. Dane stepped into the core chamber, his face covered in black ash, his armor cracked from decades of war, his eyes burning with the fury of forgotten graves. And the general froze, not from fear of death, but from the realization that it was not death that stood before him, it was judgment. The general tried to press the activation panel, but his hand would not move. Dane raised his arm, and the device fell apart, not exploded. Just fell piece by piece, like it forgot what it was built for, like it had never been anything more than scrap in his presence. Stepped closer, and the general dropped to his knees, not out of respect, but because his body could no longer carry the weight of being wrong for so long. He whispered questions. Why, how, what are you? And Dane finally spoke for the first time since the war began. I am the answer to every scream you buried, every name you erased, every planet you burned. I am not here to win. I am here to remember. Then he left. He walked away from the most powerful weapon in the galaxy and let it remain untouched. Because he didn't need to destroy, it had already broken everything that mattered outside. The Citadel, the remaining ships tried to run, but their engines stalled their maps. Scrambled, their captains found messages on their dashboards written in perfect Krylok script run, where, and as they stared into the collapsing storm of the dying star, the Citadel behind them began to light up, not with fire, but with human code lines of language, dancing across the surface, like veins of light rewriting. Stone turning fortress into beacon, message into legacy. The hunt was over. The warning had been written in blood and silence. The galaxy was finally listening. Message to the galaxy. The Citadel no longer belonged to the Kryloks. Its core pulsed with unfamiliar rhythm. Its lights no longer blinked in military sequence, but in slow waves like a sleeping heart. The machines inside responded not to Krylok code, but to something older, something deeper, something that remembered Earth across the galaxy. The signal broke through layers of blocked frequencies, through forgotten satellites and abandoned stations, through deep space relays that had not been touched in decades. It played everywhere at once, from high council chambers to smuggler ports, from refugee colonies to war-torn front lines. The message came not in voice, not in violence, but in vision. A man stood in a field of stars. Alone behind him burned the wreckage of the Citadel. In front of him, the galaxy watched. He did not wear a crown or a uniform. He wore scars. He wore ash. He wore the silence of those who had died before him. His eyes were calm, but behind them lived storms, the kind that reshaped planets, the kind that never truly passed. He raised his hand, and the stars behind him shifted, forming a shape simple and sharp. Earth, the symbol of a world once burned, now reborn. Message began not in language, but in feeling. We were the ones you thought gone. We were the ones you called weak. You erased our name from your histories. You built your thrones on our ashes and sang victory songs while we bled in silence. We did not die. We became something else. In fire we learned patience. In darkness we found purpose. And in silence we remembered everything you did. We do not seek war, but we do not fear it. We do not seek revenge, but we carry it. You feared our weapons, but forgot our will. You feared our armies, but never faced our ghosts. Now we do not knock, we do not ask, we do not run. We come forward only once. When we do not return. The stars flickered, and for a moment the entire galaxy felt smaller, not because Earth had grown, but because its presence could no longer be denied. Planets across Krylok space surrendered without battle fleets, shut down their weapons, and turned away colonies. Once proud of conquest, now burned their flags in fear, not because they were told to, but because they finally understood the humans were not monsters. They were mirrors. Every horror the galaxy had thrown at them, they had reflected back, sharper, colder, faster, not because they wanted to, but because they had to, because survival had not been their goal. Memory had. In a quiet corner of the galaxy, an old alien watched the broadcast from a rusted outpost, his eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of guilt. He had once stood beside the Krylocks during the burning wars. He had believed what they told him, that humans were dangerous, that they had to be erased, that they were a threat to order. But now, as he watched that lone man stand among stars, he saw not a threat, but a warning, a reminder that even stars could bleed if they forgot what they were made of. On Earth, the last sky towers blinked for the first time in a century. The surface, once blackened by war, now shimmered with strange life. Metal and soil fused into something new. Forests growing through steel, rivers running along abandoned highways. The planet was not what it was, but it had never truly been lost. The Voidborn returned, not as rulers, not as gods, but as witnesses. They had survived, not to conquer, but to ensure the galaxy never forgot again. Vera stood beside Dane. As the signal faded, she said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Joran adjusted the blade on his back and stared into the void that had once held the Citadel, now just a memory burned into gravity. Dane turned his back on the stars and faced Earth, his voice low and final. We did not want your fear, we wanted your respect, but now you will remember forever. And so the message ended, not with fire, not with death, but with silence. A Silence that reached every corner of the galaxy and said only this Earth is still here and it will never be forgotten again.